Hi, I'm Jay Carter, and this is the MarketView Minute. Today we're going to talk about step 5 of the 5-step process for how to find and buy a business. Step 5 is called close. As a reminder, the 5 steps of how to find and buy a business include define, discover, connect, concur, and close. For step 1, define, we talked about creating a specific definition of what it is you want to buy. For step 2, discover, we talked about creating an expansive initial target list of potential acquisition candidates. Step 3, or connect, was all about connecting with the potential acquisition targets. And step 4, concur, is about reaching a written agreement with just one of the potential acquisition targets to move forward with a transaction. At this point in the process, you've executed an LOI or letter of intent with one of your acquisition targets. If the buyer and seller are both ethical players and are acting in good faith, both parties are committed to working hard to get the transaction described in the LOI closed within the specified time frame. Well, it sounds like this deal is a slam dunk at this point. You and the seller have fallen in love, you've both signed an agreement to get married, and now it's simply a matter of formalities at this point, right? Well, of course not. This step in the process is where most transactions crash and burn. It's where the stress goes way up, energy begins to wane, and patience wears thin. Why is this? Well, the closing step involves two major functions: buyer due diligence and closing documentation preparation. Buyer due diligence really is the moment of truth for the seller. As I discussed in my How to Sell a Business series, most sellers are unprepared for the rigors of a buyer due diligence process. And as a result, sellers are under a tremendous amount of pressure to provide and create a lot of documentation and data to the buyer. Some of this may be easily produced, some may be extremely difficult or even impossible to produce. Buyer due diligence naturally places the seller in a vulnerable and often defensive position. And now we get to closing documentation preparation. This may appear to be a routine matter that the buyers and sellers' lawyers take care of. The lawyers are definitely driving the actual preparation of the documents, but what goes into those documents should be driven by the buyer and the seller. The closing documents must reflect the business deal that the buyer and seller are in agreement to after the buyer's due diligence is completed. And as a result of surprises or negative findings during buyer due diligence, the buyer and the seller may have to completely renegotiate the terms of the LOI before closing documents can be prepared. Thus, the closing documentation preparation often turns into a tedious exercise that may involve splitting a few or a lot of hairs by both parties. This is why it's so important that both parties are 100% committed to getting the deal closed early in the process. To quote one of my favorite advisors, a strong commitment to closing by buyer and seller is the best insurance for a successful transaction. Well, that's it for this series on how to find and buy a business. If you have questions or would like to discuss your unique situation with me personally, please scan the QR code on the screen, download my personal contact information, and feel free to reach out anytime.